time has come for America to hear the truth about this tragic war. I've chosen to preach about the war in Vietnam today because I agree with Dante that the hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. There comes a time when silence is betrayal. Even when pressed by the demands of inner truth, men do not easily assume the task of opposing their government's policy, especially in time of war. Now, of course, one of the difficulties in speaking out today grows out of the fact that there are those who are seeking to equate dissent with disloyalty. It's a dark day in our nation when high-level authorities will seek to use every method to silence dissent. There is at the outset a very obvious and almost facile connection between the war in Vietnam and the struggle I and others have been waging in America, of a society gone mad on war. And I knew that America would never invest the necessary funds or energies in rehabilitation of its poor so long as adventures like Vietnam continue to draw men and skills and money like some demonic destructive suction tube. You may not know it, my friends, but it is estimated that we spend $500,000 to kill each enemy soldier, while we spend only $53 for each person classified as poor. And much of that $53 goes for salaries to people who are not poor. So I was increasingly compelled to see the war as an enemy of the poor and attack it as such.
All right, folks, we are back here on Straight Out of the Cannon, the abbreviated 1 hour version. So we're going to have to get out of here fairly soon. But before we do, I wanted to touch on a trio of anniversaries involving the Dr. Martin Luther King. In 1967, he gave the speech that we just were listening to, his Beyond Vietnam speech, where he condemned the United States government as the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. If you want to know where my politics come from, my values, my beliefs come from, a lot of it comes from Martin Luther King. Man, I believe is the greatest American this country ever produced. And the Beyond Vietnam speech is one of the things that solidified it to me, because it would have been very easy for MLK to be a puppet of Lyndon Johnson after the Civil Rights Act, after the Voting Rights Act, after the Fair Housing, all these things, all these acts in the 1960s that Lyndon Johnson did. I always tell people he's the last decent American president. There haven't been any good presidents since Lyndon Johnson, at least in terms of policies that directly affected our lives. I mean, black poverty was cut in half in the 1960s, between 1963 and 1970. I don't care who you like. I don't care if you like Obama, if you like Clinton or any of these, Biden or any of these clowns, Reagan, Trump, Bush, any of these people. They ain't doing anything like that, especially not for the black community. Nothing like the Civil Rights Act, nothing like the Fair Housing Act, the Voting Rights Act. It would have been very easy for MLK to be a puppet and just coast off of the things that he sort of nudged Lyndon Johnson towards in the 1960s. But no, he actually incurred the wrath of Johnson and so many liberals at the time because he stood up against the imperialism of the war in Vietnam. It didn't matter if other civil rights leaders were going along with it. For him, it was wrong morally. Just like Muhammad Ali was wrong for these brothers morally to go along with. And because of that, they could not allow themselves. They couldn't allow themselves to go along with it. Also, another speech that we're celebrating the anniversary of would be Martin's very last speech that he gave. I've been to the mountaintop speech, which I think is another brilliant speech that he gave at the time.
All we say to America is be true to what you said on paper. If I lived in China or even Russia or any totalitarian country, maybe I could understand some of these illegal injunctions. Maybe I could understand the denial of certain basic First Amendment privileges because they haven't committed themselves to that over there. But somewhere I read of the freedom of assembly. Somewhere I read of the freedom of speech. Somewhere I read of the freedom of press. Somewhere I read that the greatness of America is the right to protest far right. And so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Wow. What a speech, man. That's a very abbreviated version of the I have been to the mountaintop speech. It's important to state that he was assassinated the very next day after giving that speech. You know, in that speech, it really, what really makes it important is because he's telling America to be what it says it is. He says you say you're for freedom and you're for liberty, well, be for it. In that speech, he talks about very specifically the First Amendment, the right to free speech, what I talk about here on this show all the time. How many people in the media and just because they don't like what Trump is saying or they don't like what Elon Musk or some other guy is saying, they want to get rid of the First Amendment. Martin Luther King understood the value of the First Amendment, okay? You're not going to always be in power, okay? You want to say this guy's saying hate speech today, tomorrow he'll be saying Black Lives Matter is hate speech. Then what? You know, Martin Luther King had all kinds of wisdom and foresight to understand that the First Amendment, that constitutional rights were important. He specifically talks about the freedom of assembly, the freedom of the press, the freedom of protest, all things that have been under attack by both parties. Both parties, you know, I excoriate them on this, both of them on this show. You know, we've seen this over the last 56 years since Martin has been gone. Of course, like I said, the day after this speech, he was assassinated on April 4th, 1968. And it, you know, it's looking at where America's gone since he's been gone. I can honestly say that we have not recovered from losing Dr. Martin Luther King. And I don't know if we ever will.